You're crossing the North Atlantic in the dead of winter. Waves as tall as buildings, so cold your breath freezes mid-air. And here's the crazy part. No cabin to crawl into, no shelter, no fire to warm your hands. The Vikings did this all the time. Somehow, they survived trips that would kill you or me in a few hours. So how did they pull it off? The answer is way more interesting than you'd think. Here's how Vikings actually survived the North Atlantic. So yeah, if these stories work for you, subscribe. And I'm curious, what time is it where you are? Comment below. Last week someone from Canada said they listened during lunch breaks. Not judging, just wasn't expecting that. We're heading to Viking Age Scandinavia in a minute. First though, get comfortable. Seriously, take a second. Adjust whatever needs adjusting. You're not going to want to move once we start. Your eyes snap open to darkness and bitter cold. Something's wrong. The wooden planks beneath your back shift violently. Your stomach lurches as the entire world drops away. For a terrifying moment, you're weightless. Then the crash comes. Icy water sprays across your face as the ship slams back into the sea. Your body slides a few inches across the damp wood before your shoulder hits the rowing bench. Get up, your watch. A hand roughly shakes your shoulder. The voice belongs to Bjorn, your sleeping partner. His beard is crusted with ice. His eyes red-rimmed from salt spray. You've been asleep for maybe 3 hours. Maybe. Time works differently out here on the North Atlantic in winter. Let me paint you a picture of exactly where you are right now. It's nothing like your warm, soft bed. You're on a Viking longship, about 80 feet long and 17 feet wide. Picture a massive wooden canoe, basically, and you're in the middle of the North Atlantic, in winter, in 1000 CE. The waves around you are literally the size of 2-story buildings. Not an exaggeration. 30 feet high, easy. Your ship is climbing up one side and sliding down the other, over and over and over again. How do people not just die out here immediately, you're probably thinking? Well, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Because here's the shocking thing that archaeologists have discovered. Vikings never heated their ships. Not with braziers, not with hearths, not with any fire at all. This wasn't because they were too primitive to figure out fire. These are the same people who built incredibly sophisticated longhouses with central hearths and smoke evacuation systems. They knew fire. They just deliberately chose not to use it at sea. And wait, it gets weirder. They didn't just avoid fire during storms when it might be dangerous. They didn't use fire at all. Ever. On any voyage. No exceptions. How do we know this? The evidence comes from the ships themselves, preserved for 1,000 years in the mud and silt of Scandinavian fjords. The most complete evidence comes from Roskilde Fjord in Denmark, where archaeologists found 5 Viking ships dating from 1000 to 1070 CE. These ships, known as the Skuldelev ships, included everything from warships to cargo vessels to fishing boats. The archaeologists found water barrels, tool chests, ballast stones, even traces of preserved food. But across all 5 different vessels, not a single heating device, no brazier, no hearth, nothing. Maybe these ships were special, you might be thinking. Nope. This pattern continues across every major Viking ship discovery. The Oseberg ship from 834 CE did have elaborate cooking vessels, but here's the twist. They were burial goods for the afterlife, never actually used at sea. It's like packing a microwave for the dead. Looks good, but nobody's making popcorn. Hold up, I hear you saying. We've all seen the movies. Vikings are these hardy warriors who just tough it out, right? No. Think about it. The North Atlantic in winter gets to freezing and below. The average temperature in January is around 28 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 2 degrees Celsius, and that's not counting the wind chill of storms. Without heat, a human body loses core temperature rapidly. Hypothermia sets in, death follows. Plus, Vikings didn't just zip across the ocean in a day. These voyages took weeks. Nobody survives weeks of freezing temperatures without heat, not even Vikings. So why would they make this seemingly insane choice to sail without fire? The answer is both simple and terrifying. Fire and wooden ships are mortal enemies. Imagine you're on a vessel made entirely of pine and oak, held together with tarred rope. Every surface around you contains highly flammable materials. The planks of the ship are sealed with tar. The gaps between them are stuffed with animal hair and wool. The rigging is waterproofed with pine pitch. And the sail? It's densely woven wool treated with animal fat for water resistance. Basically a massive torch just waiting for ignition. But the real danger was the completely open design of Viking ships. Unlike later vessels with enclosed decks, Viking ships were essentially enormous open boats. No bulkheads, no fire breaks, no way to contain a blaze once it started. Maritime archaeology studies indicate a fire in such conditions could consume an entire vessel in under 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Okay, fine, you might say, but couldn't they just be really careful with a fire? The sagas actually answer this question. Norwegian legal texts preserved in the Gragas law codes mandated 3 daily shore trips for ship's cooks, 1 for water collection and 2 for meal preparation. The Erbygja saga describes crews drawing lots for who was to prepare food on the ship. But this refers to shore-based preparation, not cooking aboard. So if you couldn't have fire trapped on frozen seas for weeks without heat, how did Vikings possibly survive? Get this, they completely reimagined what warmth meant. While you're huddled on that bench, pulling your cloak tighter around you, you notice something strange. Despite the freezing temperatures, the men and women around you aren't shivering uncontrollably. Their movements are deliberate, efficient, but not frantic with cold. Your own clothes are different from anything you've worn before. You're not just wearing wool, you're wearing what archaeologists have discovered was a sophisticated layered clothing system. Archaeological evidence from sites like Herjolfsnes in Greenland reveals these ingenious systems could retain warmth even when wet, a critical advantage over many modern materials. Ever gone hiking in cotton? Get it wet and you'll freeze. This Viking wool technology was superior to a lot of what we use today. Vikings developed different wool grades for different functions: wind resistance, insulation, and moisture management. But the most remarkable discovery comes from preserved clothing finds and saga descriptions. Each morning you participate in a bizarre ritual. Women crew members use bone needles and wax thread to sew men's sleeves tight at the wrists, not tied, not buttoned, sewn shut. This creates an airtight seal preventing heat loss. Before combat or landing, warriors cut themselves free with their sax knives. I know what you're thinking. That's it. Their big solution was good clothes and sewn sleeves. Not even close. This is just the beginning. Your body still feels stiff from sleep, but not as cold as you expected. The reason becomes clear as you fully wake up. You weren't sleeping alone. Forget Hollywood's image of Vikings wrapped in individual furs. The reality was far more intimate. Vikings used communal sleeping systems documented in multiple saga sources. The Eagle saga describes shared sleeping arrangements using what they called waterproof skin bags, likely the Hud fat mentioned in the Prose Edda. These were basically two-person sleeping bags made of sheepskin with fur lining. They weren't designed for privacy, they were designed for survival. Two bodies in an insulated space generate compound heat. The bags could maintain internal temperatures 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside air using only body heat. Bjorn, your sleeping partner, was keeping you alive while you slept. And when he slept and you stood watch, you returned the favour. This wasn't some weird quirk or personal preference. Crews were assigned sleeping partners based on watch schedules, as documented in the Landnamma Bok. When one sailor stood watch, his body heat warmed the shared space. When they switched, the second man entered an already warm environment. The sleeping area never cooled completely. So they just cuddled their way across the Atlantic? Well, kind of, yeah. But with a level of engineering sophistication we're only now beginning to appreciate, the sleeping arrangement itself showed thermal genius. Ship reconstructions indicate crews slept between rowing benches on platforms created from stored oars, staying above the coldest bilge air. And get this, when not in use for sailing, the sail itself was lowered to become a tent over the entire vessel, trapping warm air from dozens of bodies underneath. Even wealthy Vikings shared these communal arrangements. Ship leaders received no special heating privileges. Survival requirements overrode social distinctions during voyages. You stand up and stretch, your muscles protesting. The cold is still there, still brutal, but somehow manageable. Your shipmates move around you with practiced efficiency, adjusting their clothing, checking the rigging, scanning the horizon. As the ship climbs another massive wave, you grab the gunwale to steady yourself. The wood is slick with ice. The entire vessel groans as it crests the wave and begins its stomach-dropping descent. What strikes you isn't just the cold or the danger, it's how normal it all seems to everyone around you. These aren't supermen with magical cold resistance. They're ordinary humans who have systematically engineered their way around what should be a lethal environment. Bjorn hands you a piece of something hard and flat. Food. But not as you know it. Maintaining body heat in such conditions requires enormous calories. We're talking 2,000 to 3,000 per day. But without fire, how do you fuel a body working in freezing conditions? You're about to discover the next piece of Viking cold weather genius. Food specifically designed for cold consumption. Trading post excavations reveal the preparation techniques. What you're holding is ship's biscuit, a dense, hard bread that wouldn't spoil in salt spray. Other staples included dried fish that remained edible for months and something really special. Cold porridge systems prepared before departure. The porridge system, described in the Icelandinga saga, was particularly ingenious. Cooks would prepare massive quantities with added butter and salt for preservation. This mixture would congeal into a nutrient-dense paste that could be eaten directly or mixed with cold water. You bite into the biscuit. It's hard enough to crack teeth, but your saliva slowly softens it. The taste is nutty and dense, not delicious by any measure, but packed with energy. As dawn breaks over the horizon, painting the endless waves with pale gold, you realize something profound. These Vikings didn't just endure the cold. They didn't just suffer through it with gritted teeth and frozen beards. They systematically transformed their entire approach to survive and thrive within it. And you've only just begun to understand how they did it. The ship rises on another massive swell. Around you, the crew adjusts the sail to catch the bitter wind. No one complains about the cold. No one huddles uselessly. Every movement serves a purpose. You're watching a system perfected over generations. A system that would enable Vikings to cross the most treacherous waters on Earth and reach lands no European had seen before. The next wave is coming, and with it, more secrets of Viking cold water survival. Bjorn gestures toward the sail. Your watch has begun. The sail billows above you, catching the icy wind that cuts across the deck. Your hands are numb despite the specialized mittens you wear. Leather outer shells lined with wool, with a separate thumb and a flap that can be pulled back when you need finger dexterity. These aren't just any mittens. Archaeological finds from Hedeby and York show they were specifically designed for maritime use. Waterproofed with animal fats and sealed at the wrists to prevent the deadly intrusion of cold air. You adjust the sail under Bjorn's watchful eye. He's been sailing these waters for 20 winters, and his weathered face shows it. Deep creases around pale blue eyes, skin tanned to leather by sun and salt. Wind's shifting, he mutters, pointing to the horizon where darker clouds gather. Storm by midday. Great. Just what you needed. Another storm. So let's talk about this clothing system in more detail, because honestly, it's the first line of defense between Vikings and frozen death. You ever notice how outdoor gear companies today make a huge deal about their revolutionary layering systems? Base layer, mid layer, shell layer? Yeah, Vikings were doing that 1,000 years ago, but with technology specifically designed for wet maritime environments. But wait, I hear you asking, isn't wool itchy and uncomfortable? The wool you're picturing isn't what Vikings used. Archaeological textile evidence shows they developed multiple grades and weaves of wool for different purposes. The base layer against the skin was made from specially processed underwood, the finest, softest fibers from the sheep's fleece, similar to modern merino wool. This layer wickered moisture away from the body. The middle layers provided insulation using wadmal, a densely woven wool that trapped air for warmth. Evidence from Greenlandic burial sites shows these middle layers often incorporated multiple pieces sewn together to allow movement while eliminating gaps where cold air could enter. The outer layer was the real masterpiece. This was often made from vadmal, a water-resistant wool that had been treated with lanolin, natural sheep's oil, and sometimes even seal oil for additional waterproofing. For maritime crews specifically, archaeological evidence shows outer layers were often made from seal skin, naturally waterproof and incredibly durable. Okay, you might be thinking, but how do we know they actually used these clothes at sea and not just on land? Great question. The evidence comes from multiple sources. Ship burial goods often included complete sets of maritime clothing. The Gokstad ship burial, for instance, contained specialized winter garments clearly intended for sea use. But even more compelling is the evidence from the remarkably preserved bodies found in Greenlandic permafrost. These Viking settlers, who regularly crossed the treacherous waters between Greenland and Iceland, were buried in their everyday clothes, providing us with intact examples of their maritime wear. Wait, the story gets better. Remember those sewn sleeves I mentioned? As you work the sail lines, you notice the tight seal at your wrists. Every morning, the women on board, yes, Viking ships often had mixed-gender crews, especially on settlement voyages, would sew the men's sleeves shut with bone needles and wax-coated thread. According to the Laxdæla saga, this created an airtight seal that prevented the deadly heat loss that occurs at the wrists, where blood vessels run close to the surface. The whole process took less than a minute per person, A small-time investment for a massive heat retention benefit. But how did they do anything with their hands sewn up? I can hear you wondering. Simple. Viking sailors wore what we might call adaptive clothing. The sleeves weren't fully sewn shut like a straitjacket. They were tightened at specific points, creating a seal while still allowing movement. Before landing or in case of battle, warriors would cut themselves free using their seax knives, the utility blade every Viking carried. Look down at your own clothing now. You're wearing 3 layers of wool tunics under a sealskin jacket. Your legs are covered with thick wool trousers wrapped with criss-crossing bands of wool cloth from ankle to knee, providing extra insulation where blood vessels are close to the surface. On your feet are leather shoes stuffed with dried moss, nature's insulation, and wrapped in wool foot cloths. On top of all that, you're wearing a heavy woolen cloak fastened with a bone pin. This is really excessive, you might think, but it's not. It's precisely calculated. The average temperature out here in the winter North Atlantic hovers around 28 Tukens, but wind chill can drive it down to 40. At those temperatures, exposed skin freezes in minutes. Complete body exposure means death in hours. Yet here you are, alive. Cold, sure, but nowhere near death. Bjorn notices your examination of your clothing. "First winter voyage?" he asks, a hint of amusement in his voice. You nod, not trusting yourself to speak without your teeth chattering. "You get used to it," he says, though you doubt that very much. "The clothes do most of the work if you let them. There's wisdom there that modern outdoorsmen still preach. Don't fight your gear, work with it." The ship climbs another massive wave, the wooden hull creaking under the strain. As it reaches the crest, the wind hits with renewed fury, biting through every tiny gap in your clothing. Bjorn points to your collar, where a small space has opened between your layers. "Fix that," he says simply. "Cold finds the gaps, always." This wasn't just practical advice, it was a philosophy. Archaeological evidence shows Viking maritime clothing had virtually no gaps or openings when properly worn. Even the hood of your sealskin jacket is designed to leave only a small opening for your eyes. You adjust your collar, sealing the gap, and the difference is immediate. The cutting edge of the wind is blunted. Look over there at the woman working the rudder oar. Her name is Astrid, and she's been sailing since she was 12. Her clothing is slightly different from the men's. The layers are the same, but the cut accommodates a female body. Gender didn't matter out here. Only functionality did. Archaeological evidence from female Viking graves shows women's maritime clothing was every bit as sophisticated as men's, just with different tailoring. "I don't get it," you say to Bjorn, your voice nearly lost in the wind. "If Vikings had all this amazing clothing technology, why does everyone think they were just these super tough warriors who didn't feel cold?" Bjorn laughs, a short barking sound. "Hollywood," he says, though of course he wouldn't know that word. Outsiders see what they want to see. They see our raids, our ships, our axes. They don't see our needles, our looms, our thread. He's not wrong. The popular image of Vikings as mindless berserkers ignores the sophisticated engineering culture they actually were. The storm Bjorn predicted is approaching faster than expected. Dark clouds pile on the horizon, and the sea takes on that strange, flat quality it gets before a major blow. "All hands!" comes the call from the ship's captain, a bear of a man named Thorold. "Secure the sail." You join the rush to reef the massive woolen sail. As you work, something incredible happens. Despite the dropping temperature and increasing wind, your body begins to warm from the exertion. The layered clothing system works with your movement, not against it. Sweat forms on your skin, but the innermost wool layer wicks it away before it can chill you. The middle layers trap your body heat in pockets of air. The outer layer blocks the wind. It's a complete system, designed over generations of trial and error in the harshest conditions imaginable. But clothing isn't just about functionality, it's about identity too. Look at the coloured bands woven into the edges of your woolen tunic. These aren't just decorative, they identify your home region to other Vikings. Archaeological textile remains show distinct regional patterns in these coloured bands. Someone from Hedeby would instantly recognise the design from Trondheim or Dublin. This created an instant sense of community when ships met at sea or in distant harbours. In a world without flags or uniforms, your clothing told others exactly who you were and where you came from. As the crew secures the sail, reducing its area to prepare for the coming storm, you notice something else about their clothing. Despite the cold, no one is wearing gloves, just the specialized mittens that can be flipped back when fine dexterity is needed. This is another example of Viking adaptability. The mittens kept hands warm, but the ability to expose the fingers quickly was essential for handling lines, weapons, and tools. "Down!" Bjorn shouts, and everyone drops to the deck as the first blast of storm wind hits the ship. You press yourself against the damp wood, feeling the vessel heel sharply. Cold spray washes across the deck, soaking everyone. And here's where the true genius of Viking clothing becomes apparent. You're wet, completely soaked in near-freezing seawater. But you're not getting colder. The wool continues to insulate even when wet. Unlike cotton, which pulls heat away from the body when damp, wool creates an exothermic reaction with water, actually generating a small amount of heat. Archaeological textile analysis shows Viking maritime wool was specially processed to maximize this property, with a high lanolin content preserved in the fibers. The ship rights itself, and everyone scrambles back to their positions. Your hands are wet but still functional in the specialized mittens. Your layered clothing still insulates despite being soaked. You're cold, certainly, but nowhere near hypothermic. "Now you see why we dress this way," Bjorn says, water streaming from his beard. "Any other clothing would kill you right now." He's not exaggerating. Modern hypothermia studies show that water conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than air. Immersion in cold water can drop core temperature to fatal levels in 15 minutes. Yet here on this Viking ship, an entire crew routinely gets soaked with freezing spray and continues functioning. The storm settles into a steady rhythm of wind and waves. The reduced sail gives the ship enough power to maintain steerage way without risking capsize. Everyone finds their sea legs, adjusting to the violent motion. Night approaches, bringing even colder temperatures. The air temperature drops to 25 degrees Celsius, with wind chill far below that. And now comes the next challenge. You've been on watch for hours, and exhaustion is setting in. Soon you'll need to sleep. But how do you rest in these conditions? Before you go off watch, there's one more clothing ritual to complete. The women of the crew, and yes, archaeological and saga evidence confirms women were common on Viking voyages, especially settlement journeys, move through the ship with bone needles and waxed thread. It's time for the evening sleeve adjustment. As your body cools down from the day's exertions, the seal at your wrists needs tightening to prevent heat loss during sleep. A woman named Sigrid approaches you with needle ready. "First voyage?" she asks, echoing Bjorn's earlier question. You nod. "Hold still then. This matters more than you know." With quick, practiced movements, she unpicks the morning stitches and resews your sleeves, tighter now for the cold night ahead. The thread is made of sinew, incredibly strong and slightly elastic to allow for the small movements you'll make while sleeping. This seemingly small detail, adjusting clothing throughout the day based on activity and temperature, shows the sophistication of Viking cold management. They didn't just put on clothes and endure. They actively managed their microclimate at all times. With the sleeve ritual complete, you're ready to go off watch. You make your way carefully along the heaving deck to the sleeping area amidships, where the motion is least violent. Between the rowing benches, raised platforms hold the sleeping furs, or rather, the sleeping bags. And as you're about to discover, this is where Vikings truly revolutionized cold weather survival. But that's a story for our next part. The sleeping arrangements that would change how you think about Vikings forever. As you settle onto the platform, already feeling the brutal cold seeping into your exhausted muscles, you wonder how anyone could possibly sleep in these conditions. The answer, waiting for you in the form of a sheepskin bag, will completely transform your understanding of Viking ingenuity. The storm rages on, the long Arctic night falls, and the real test of Viking cold weather survival is about to begin. The night air feels like a physical assault as you make your way to the sleeping area. Everything around you is cold and hard. The wooden planks beneath your feet, the metal fittings on the ship's strakes, even the ropes securing the sail are stiff with ice. Your muscles ache from hours of work in the freezing cold. Your fingers, despite the specialized mittens, have lost sensation. Your face burns where the salt spray has frozen against your skin. In these conditions, sleep seems impossible, dangerous even. You've heard stories of men falling asleep in the cold and simply not waking up. And yet, as you approach the sleeping area amidships, you see several crew members already deep in slumber, their breathing steady despite the violent motion of the ship and the howling wind. "How?" you mutter, the word emerging as a cloud of vapour. Bjorn appears beside you, his watch also complete. "You'll see," he says, gesturing to the sleeping platform. "It's better than you think." On the platform between the rowing benches lies what looks like a heap of furs, but as you get closer, you realise it's something far more sophisticated. This is the hudfat mentioned in the Prose Edda and described in multiple saga sources. The word translates roughly to skin bag, but that simple name conceals an engineering marvel. What you're looking at is essentially a two-person sleeping bag made of sheepskin with the wool still attached. The skin faces outward, creating a water-resistant shell. The wool faces inward, providing insulation. But there's more. Archaeological finds from winter campsites in both Greenland and Iceland show these bags were often lined with additional furs, bear, wolf, or fox, for extreme cold conditions. "I sleep alone," you tell Bjorn, not entirely comfortable with the idea of sharing such close quarters. He laughs. "No, you don't. Not if you want to live." This wasn't a matter of preference or comfort. It was simple thermodynamics. Two bodies in an insulated space generate compound heat. The hudfat was designed to trap and amplify that heat. According to saga accounts and confirmed by modern experimental archaeology, these sleeping bags could maintain internal temperatures 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside air using only body heat. "We're assigned partners," Bjorn explains. pointing to a crude chart scratched into a wooden plank near the captain's position, based on watch schedules. This wasn't random. The Landnama Bók, Iceland's Book of Settlements, describes how crews were assigned sleeping partners based on complementary watch rotations. When one sailor stood watch, his body heat warmed the shared sleeping space. When they switched, the second man entered an already warm environment. The genius of this system is that the sleeping area never cooled completely. Modern thermal studies conducted during the 2007 Sea Stallion voyage, a reconstruction of the Skuldelev 2 ship that sailed from Roskilde, Denmark to Dublin, Ireland, confirmed that these sleeping arrangements were remarkably effective. The expedition used authentic Hudfat sleeping bags based on archaeological finds. Thermal imaging showed that even in freezing conditions, the interior of the bags maintained temperatures around 50 degrees, 10 degrees, well above the danger zone for hypothermia. "You're with me," Bjorn says, gesturing to one of the Hudfats. "Captain's orders." You hesitate, but the cold is becoming unbearable. Your core temperature is dropping. Sleep is necessary for survival. With awkward movements, you crawl into the bag. The interior is surprisingly soft and immediately warmer than the open air. Bjorn follows, his bulky frame pressing against yours in the confined space. It's awkward at first, uncomfortable even. But then something remarkable happens. Warmth begins to build. Not the searing heat of fire, but a gentle, enveloping warmth that starts at your core and gradually spreads to your extremities. "Better, yes?" Bjorn asks, his voice already heavy with approaching sleep. "It is better. Much better." The Hudfat traps your combined body heat, reflecting it back to create a microclimate entirely separate from the freezing chaos outside. Even the violent motion of the ship seems lessened inside the secure confines of the sleeping bag. The sheepskin outer layer grips the wooden platform, preventing you from sliding with each wave. "I still don't understand," you mumble, feeling warmth return to your fingers and toes. "Why not just use fire in a controlled way? Surely there's some method." Bjorn's answer is immediate and definitive. Fire killed more sailors than storms ever did. He's not exaggerating. Maritime archaeology has uncovered numerous shipwrecks with evidence of onboard fires. The remains tell a grim story. Fire on wooden ships spread with terrifying speed. "Romans tried it," Bjorn continues, surprising you with his knowledge of other seafaring cultures. Bronze braziers, charcoal in clay boxes, still lost ships to fire. This is historically accurate. Roman naval archaeology has revealed ships with sophisticated heating systems. Bronze braziers set in sand-filled boxes, specially ventilated fire pits, even ceramic heating tubes running under benches. But even with these precautions, Roman maritime records describe numerous catastrophic fires. The Mediterranean, with its generally calmer seas and warmer temperatures, made such risks sometimes acceptable. The North Atlantic offered no such margin for error. "One spark," Bjorn says, his voice dropping to ensure only you hear his words. "And everyone dies. Not just the careless one. Everyone." This collective responsibility for safety formed a core principle of Viking maritime culture. Archaeological evidence from ship burials and the sagas themselves emphasized that while Viking society on land was highly stratified, at sea survival depended on absolute cooperation. Even ship captains and wealthy merchants shared the same sleeping arrangements as common sailors. The Gokstad ship burial, containing the remains of a high-status individual surrounded by rich grave goods, also included standard maritime sleeping equipment, identical to that used by ordinary crew. Sleep, Bjorn advises. Storm's getting worse. Need your strength tomorrow. He's right about the storm. Even within the relative comfort of the Hudfat, you can feel the ship's motion becoming more violent, hear the wind howling with increasing fury across the deck. But unlike before, you no longer fear freezing to death in your sleep. The Hudfat, this deceptively simple technology, has transformed an unendurable situation into a survivable one. As sleep begins to claim you, you notice something else about the sleeping area. Above you, the ship's sail has been partially lowered to form a crude tent over the entire midship section. This creates another layer of protection from wind and spray, trapping the collective heat of all the sleeping bodies beneath it. Ship reconstructions based on archaeological findings from the Skuldelev ships show this was standard practice. The sail, when not needed for propulsion, doubled as shelter. The densely woven wool, treated with animal fat for water resistance, made an effective windbreak. You drift towards sleep, your body gradually warming in the shared Hudfat. The last thing you see before your eyes close is the frost forming on the inside of the woolen sail tent above you. Physical proof of how much heat is being generated by the sleeping crew and captured by this ingenious system. The next thing you know, it's dawn, or what passes for dawn in the stormy North Atlantic winter, a subtle lightening of the perpetual gloom. You're warm, not comfortably warm like in your bed at home, but functionally warm. Your core temperature is normal. Your extremities have sensation. You can move your fingers and toes without pain. Bjorn is gone, already on watch, but the Hudfat has retained much of its warmth, even with only your body inside it. You emerge into the bitter cold of the open deck. The contrast is shocking, like stepping from a heated room into a freezer. But your night in the Hudfat has restored your core temperature and energy. You can face the cold with renewed resilience. The storm has passed, leaving behind a grey, heaving sea and low clouds. The air temperature remains well below freezing. Ice clings to every surface of the ship, the gunwales, the mast, the rowing benches. "Eat," says Astrid, thrusting something into your hands as you emerge, before it freezes. What she's handed you is a chunk of the cold porridge system I mentioned earlier. In the slightly warmer conditions of dawn, the congealed mixture is almost soft enough to bite into directly. This porridge, described in the Islandinga saga and confirmed by food residue found in cooking vessels at Viking sites, was a caloric powerhouse. Made from barley or oats, mixed with butter and preserved with salt, it provided the enormous energy needed to maintain body heat in freezing conditions. You bite into it, feeling the rich, fatty mixture dissolve slowly in your mouth. It's not delicious by modern standards, bland and stodgy, but the caloric density is immediately apparent. Your body craves these fats and carbohydrates. All of it, Astrid insists, watching to make sure you finish every morsel. She's not being motherly. This is survival. Archaeological analysis of Viking skeletal remains shows that active sailors consume between 4,000 and 5,000 calories daily during winter voyages, nearly twice what an average modern person eats. As you chew the dense porridge, you survey the ship around you. The scene would be familiar to any sailor in any era. Ice being chipped from rigging, decks being cleared of accumulated snow, sails being checked for damage. But what's remarkable is what you don't see. No one huddled in misery, no one suffering from obvious hypothermia, no frostbite victims. Instead, you see a crew functioning efficiently despite conditions that should, by all rights, be lethal. "Storm blew us off course," says Thorald the captain. moving through the ship with practiced ease despite the rolling deck. Need to adjust heading. Navigation in Viking times was a sophisticated combination of stellar observation, wildlife patterns, and physical oceanography. Without compasses or sextants, Vikings relied on the sun and stars when visible, birds and marine life when close to land, and a deep understanding of ocean currents and wind patterns at all times. Archaeological finds from ship burials include what may be primitive bearing dials, wooden discs with markings that could help maintain course even when visible landmarks were absent, but right now the overcast sky prevents any solar navigation. Thorold relies instead on the feel of the waves against the hull and the direction of the prevailing wind. West-northwest, he commands, and the helmsman adjusts accordingly. You're heading for the next support station, one of the extensive network of harbour sites that made long-distance Viking voyaging possible. Because here's the next piece of the survival puzzle. Vikings weren't actually at sea continuously during these journeys. Recent coastal surveys have uncovered extensive harbour networks for regular shore stops. Over 200 documented sites from Norway to Newfoundland, recorded by the Viking Ship Museum's Coastal Archaeology project, show just how sophisticated this infrastructure was. Vikings would make landfall every few days when possible, allowing for proper cooking, drying of clothes, and genuine warming by fire on land. This strategy of hop and stop voyaging was essential to their success. Rather than enduring weeks of continuous freezing conditions, they would break the journey into manageable segments, each culminating in a shore stop where full recovery was possible. 3 days to the next harbour, Thorold announces, if the wind holds. 3 days. 72 hours in freezing conditions without fire, a deadly prospect for most sailors throughout history. But for this Viking crew, it's a routine calculation. You look around at the men and women working on the deck. Their breath forms clouds in the freezing air, ice crunches under their feet. The temperature remains well below freezing, yet no one is dying. No one is even in obvious distress. The Viking approach to cold weather sailing wasn't about superhuman endurance or mystical cold resistance. It was about systems, clothing systems, sleeping systems, food systems, voyage planning systems. Together, these created not just survival, but functional existence in conditions that would kill the unprepared within hours. As the day progresses, you fall into the rhythm of ship life. The work is constant, adjusting sails, bailing water, chipping ice, maintaining equipment. But there's purpose to every action, efficiency to every movement. Cold conservation becomes second nature. You learn to minimize exposure, to work in short bursts rather than continuous effort, to keep your back to the wind whenever possible. By midday, another ritual begins. The women of the crew once again circulate with bone needles and waxed thread. It's time for the daily sleeve adjustment. Looser now for active work, allowing greater circulation to the hands. This wasn't just a morning and evening ritual. Archaeological evidence shows that Vikings adjusted their clothing throughout the day, based on activity levels and weather conditions. The bone needles found on virtually every Viking ship weren't just for sail repair. They were essential survival tools for constant clothing maintenance. As Sigrid adjusts your sleeves, you notice calluses on her fingers from years of this work. The sewing isn't crude or rough, it's precise, even elegant. The thread follows exactly the same path as yesterday's stitches, creating a perfect seal without binding or chafing. You learn fast, she comments, noticing how you've positioned your arm to make her work easier. Some take weeks to understand. This cultural knowledge, how to work with the clothing, how to move in the cold, how to preserve energy, was as essential to survival as the physical garments themselves. By late afternoon, the cold intensifies as the sun, barely visible through the overcast sky, begins its early winter descent. The temperature drops further, the wind increases, ice forms more rapidly on every exposed surface, and yet no one succumbs to the cold. The Viking systems continue to function. As dusk approaches, the evening rituals begin. Sleeves are once again adjusted, tighter now for the colder night ahead. The sail is partially lowered to create the protective tent. The hud fats are prepared for the night's rest. You find yourself almost looking forward to the warmth of the shared sleeping bag. What seemed bizarre and uncomfortable yesterday now represents security and survival. Night falls. Your watch ends. You make your way to the sleeping area, where Bjorn is already waiting in the hud fat. "Harder day tomorrow," he says as you settle in beside him. Headwind coming. Everyone rows. Rowing a Viking ship was extraordinarily demanding work, even more so in freezing conditions. Modern reconstructions like the Sea Stallion voyage found that oarsmen burned up to 6,000 calories daily when rowing continuously. But right now, in the surprising warmth of the hud fat, with your body heat combining with Bjorn's to create a microclimate 20 degrees warmer than the outside air, tomorrow's challenges seem manageable. As sleep approaches, you realize you've experienced something profound. Not just survival techniques, but an entire culture built around collective endurance. Vikings didn't conquer the North Atlantic by being superhuman. They did it by being supremely, ingeniously human, by harnessing the social and technological adaptations that define our species. The hud fat warms around you, the ship rocks in the endless waves. And in the strangest of all possible environments, the freezing open deck of a Viking ship in the winter North Atlantic, you find comfort enough for sleep. But the greatest tests of Viking cold weather ingenuity still await. Because surviving the cold was only one part of the challenge. Maintaining strength and energy without cooked food, that was another problem entirely, and the Viking solution was just as ingenious. Morning comes too soon, announced by a rough shake of your shoulder. Bjorn is already up and dressed, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "Headwind," he says simply. Everyone rows. You emerge from the warmth of the hud fat, and the cold hits. You like a physical blow. The temperature has dropped further overnight. Ice covers every surface of the ship. The sea itself seems thicker, more viscous, as if approaching the freezing point. But unlike yesterday, you're not immediately incapacitated by the cold. Your night in the hud fat has maintained your core temperature. The layered clothing immediately donned traps that precious heat close to your body. Still, rowing in these conditions will push human endurance to its limits. Sustained physical exertion in extreme cold creates a dangerous paradox. Your body needs enormous energy, but that same exertion produces sweat, which can freeze and accelerate heat loss. Before the rowing begins, Astrid moves through the ship distributing the day's first meal. This is not casual breakfast, it's calculated survival. "Eat all of it," she instructs, handing you what looks like a dark, dense cake the size of your palm. "You'll need it." What you're holding is ship's biscuit, hardtack fortified with nuts, dried fruit and animal fat. Archaeological analysis of food remains from Viking sites, and ships shows these were specifically designed for cold weather maritime use. Unlike standard ship's biscuit, which was often just flour and water baked to extreme hardness, Viking journey bread incorporated high-energy ingredients. Hazelnuts and walnuts provided fats and protein. Dried apples and berries contributed natural sugars. Honey, when available, added both sweetness and antimicrobial properties that extended shelf life. But the most important addition was animal fat, usually rendered butter worked into the dough before baking. This dramatically increased the caloric density, providing the sustained energy needed for cold weather exertion. You bite into the biscuit. It's rock hard initially, but softens as you chew. The taste is rich and nutty, with occasional bursts of sweetness from the dried fruit. Not delicious by modern standards, but intensely satisfying to a body preparing for hard work in the cold. "More," says Astrid, handing you a second piece once you finish the first. Double rations for rowing days. This isn't generosity, it's calculated nutrition. Modern sports science has confirmed what Vikings learned through experience. Cold weather exercise requires up to twice the calories of the same activity in moderate temperatures. Archaeological analysis of Viking skeletal remains shows they understood this relationship. Isotope studies of bones from maritime crew burials reveal seasonal variations in caloric intake, with winter sailors consuming between 4,000 and 6,000 calories daily. As you eat the second biscuit, you observe the other preparations for the day's rowing. The oars are being cleared of ice. Leather padding is being secured to the rowing benches. Extra layers of clothing are being distributed to the rowers. Under your arms, Bjorn advises, showing you how to tuck small squares of sheepskin into your armpits. Keeps the sweat from freezing against your body. This seemingly small detail reveals another aspect of Viking cold weather genius. They understood that sweat management was as important as heat retention. Modern cold weather physiologists confirm that damp clothing can reduce insulation value by up to 90%. The sheepskin pads were specifically designed to wick moisture away from the areas where rowers would sweat most profusely, preventing the deadly combination of wetness and freezing temperatures. With preparations complete, everyone takes their positions at the oars. You find yourself on a middle bench, paired with a taciturn man named Gunnar. Thorold gives the command, and 20 oars dip into the dark water in perfect unison. The resistance is immediate, not just the natural resistance of water, but the headwind pushing against the ship's progress. The work is brutally hard. Each stroke requires maximum effort just to maintain position against the wind. Your muscles burn with exertion, your lungs ache from the freezing air, but remarkably, you're not getting colder. The combination of physical exertion and proper clothing creates a sustainable microclimate around your body. You're working at the edge of human capability, but you're not dying, not even close. After an hour of continuous rowing, Astrid makes another round of the ship. This time she carries what looks like small pieces of dark, leathery meat. Chew it slowly, she advises as she hands you a piece. Let it dissolve. This is dried fish, a staple of Viking maritime diet, but not just any dried fish. Archaeological food remains from trading posts like Hedeby and York show that Vikings developed specific preservation techniques for sailing provisions. The fish, usually cod, haddock or ling, was split, salted and dried in the open air until it achieved a moisture content below 15%. This made it virtually immune to spoilage, even in damp maritime conditions. But the true innovation was in how it was consumed. Rather than requiring cooking, this fish was designed to be eaten cold, reconstituting in the mouth through prolonged chewing. You work the piece against your palate with your tongue. Gradually it softens. Salt, intense fish flavour, and a surprising richness spread through your mouth. The protein is immediately satisfying, giving your tired muscles what they need to continue the punishing work. Rowing continues in shifts throughout the day. 2 hours on, 1 hour off. During your rest periods, you're not idle. There's ice to chip from the rigging, water to bail from the bilge, equipment to maintain. By midday, despite the brutally cold conditions and exhausting work, the crew remains functional. No one has succumbed to hypothermia. No one has collapsed from exhaustion. The Viking systems for maintaining human life without fire continue to work. Midday brings another carefully calculated meal. This time it's the cold porridge system I mentioned earlier, but with a variation specific to high energy needs. Mix it with this, Bjorn says, handing you a small container of amber liquid. Just a spoonful. It's honey, liquid gold in Viking culture. Archaeological evidence shows honey was so valued that special containers were created just for its maritime transport. The remains of these distinctive vessels have been found on numerous Viking ships. You stir a spoonful into your portion of cold porridge. The effect is transformative. The honey not only sweetens the bland mixture but provides rapidly accessible energy in the form of simple sugars. Modern sports nutrition confirms what Vikings discovered through experience. Combining complex carbohydrates, the barley or oats in the porridge, with simple sugars, honey, creates an ideal energy profile for sustained exertion. Clever, isn't it? Says Thorold, noticing your surprised expression as you taste the improved porridge. The bees work for us even in winter. This casual comment reveals a sophisticated understanding of nutrition that belies the primitive barbarian stereotype of Vikings. They didn't just preserve food, they engineered it for specific conditions and energy needs. Throughout the afternoon, the relentless work continues. Row, rest, chip ice, bail water, row again. The cycle is exhausting but effective. The ship makes steady progress against the headwind. As evening approaches, Astrid makes a final round with food, this time something you haven't seen before. It resembles modern beef jerky, thin strips of dark, dense meat. Last meal before sleep, she explains. Slow energy for the night. This is what archaeologists call travel meat, a specific preparation found at Viking sites and described in the sagas. Strips of beef, venison, or occasionally seal meat were cut thin, pounded with wooden mallets, salted, and air-dried until they achieved a moisture content below 10%. The result was completely stable at ambient temperature and required no cooking. More importantly, it provided the high-protein nutrition needed for overnight muscle recovery. You chew the tough strips, savouring the intense salty flavour. Modern nutritional science confirms the Viking wisdom. Protein consumed before sleep optimises recovery from physical exertion. With the day's rowing complete and the ship secured for night, the evening rituals begin once more. Sleeves are adjusted, the sail tent is lowered, the hud fats are prepared. Despite your exhaustion, you find yourself mentally cataloguing the various food systems you've experienced in just one day. Morning, high-fat, high-carbohydrate ship's biscuit for immediate and sustained energy. Mid-morning, protein-rich dried fish for muscle maintenance. Midday, carbohydrate-dense porridge with honey for rapid energy replenishment. Evening, protein-focused dried meat for overnight recovery. None of it required cooking. All of it was precisely calibrated for specific energy needs and bodily functions, and all of it was designed to be stable for weeks or even months at ambient temperature. Impressive, isn't it? Bjorn says, noticing your contemplative expression as you settle into the hudfat for the night. Outsiders think we survive on raw courage and berserker rage. The truth is much more interesting. He's right. The popular image of Vikings as mindless warriors ignores the sophisticated planning and nutrition science that enabled their maritime feats. As your body begins to warm in the shared sleeping bag, you consider asking Bjorn more about Viking food preservation, but exhaustion claims you before you can form the words. The combination of cold weather exertion and carefully calculated nutrition has pushed you to your limits. You wake to a changed world. Sometime during the night, the wind shifted, the perpetual overcast is broken, weak winter sunlight glitters across a calm sea. Good fortune, says Thorold as the crew assembles on deck, will make landfall by nightfall. The mood throughout the ship lifts noticeably. After days at sea in freezing conditions, the promise of land, of fire, hot food, and genuine warmth is powerfully motivating. But there are still hours of sailing ahead. The food system continues its calculated work. Breakfast is a variation on yesterday's fare. Ship's biscuit again, but this time accompanied by something new. Small cubes of what appears to be yellowish cheese. From the homeland, Astrid says proudly as she distributes the rare treat, saved for good days. This is another example of Viking food engineering. Archaeological evidence from sites like Hedeby shows they developed specific cheese preservation techniques for maritime use. The cheese was made from skimmed milk, reducing its fat content, then heavily salted and pressed into solid blocks. The result was a food that could remain stable for months at ambient temperature while retaining most of its nutritional value. You bite into a cube. The flavour is intensely sharp and salty, but beneath that is the unmistakable richness of dairy, a welcome change from the limited palette of maritime foods. Modern nutritional science confirms the Viking wisdom here as well. The combination of proteins and fats in cheese provides excellent sustained energy, while its calcium content supports bone health during physically demanding activities. As the morning progresses, the ship makes good speed across the now calm sea. The temperature remains well below freezing, but without the bitter wind of previous days, conditions feel almost comfortable. Midday brings another carefully calculated meal, but with a variation. Instead of the standard cold porridge, Astrid distributes what look like small, dense cakes, similar to the ship's biscuit but darker in colour. Blood bread, she explains, seeing your questioning look, for strength. This might sound primitive or even disgusting to modern sensibilities, but it represents sophisticated nutritional understanding. Archaeological evidence from Viking sites shows they incorporated blood, usually from cattle or pigs, into specific types of travel bread. The blood dramatically increased the iron content of the bread, essential for preventing anemia during long voyages without fresh meat. It also added significant protein value without requiring additional bulk or weight in the ship's stores. You take a tentative bite. The flavour is earthy and rich, with a distinctive mineral tang. Not pleasant by modern standards, but undeniably nutritious. As the day progresses, land appears on the horizon, a dark line barely distinguishable from the grey sea and sky. Excitement ripples through the crew. After days in the killing cold of the open ocean, the promise of shore is powerfully motivating. But Thorold tempers the enthusiasm with practical considerations. "We'll reach the harbour by dusk," he announces. "Need full strength for landing. Eat more." This isn't gluttony, it's calculated preparation. Landing a heavy ship on an unknown shore in fading light would require maximum physical effort from every crew member. Astrid makes a final round with food, this time a combination of all the previous provisions. Ship's biscuit, dried fish, cold porridge with honey, travel meat and the precious cheese. "Everything," she insists. "You'll need it all." As you consume this calculated meal, you realize you're experiencing another aspect of Viking maritime genius: the management of food as a strategic resource. Archaeological evidence from ship burials and trading posts shows Vikings maintained detailed inventories of their provisions. Food wasn't consumed randomly, but allocated based on anticipated energy needs and future requirements. The fact that Astrid is distributing everything now, without concern for tomorrow's needs, tells you that landfall is indeed certain. After days of carefully managed consumption, the rules change when shore is in sight. As afternoon fades toward evening, the dark line on the horizon resolves into a rocky coastline. Smoke rises from what must be settlements, the first sign of fire you've seen in days. "Prepare for landing," Thorold commands. "Everyone to stations." The excitement is palpable. After days in the killing cold of the open sea, land means transformation, from survival mode to comparative luxury. Because here's the next piece of the Viking maritime puzzle. They weren't actually at sea continuously during these voyages. Recent coastal surveys have uncovered extensive harbour networks for regular shore stops. Over 200 documented sites from Norway to Newfoundland, recorded by the Viking Ship Museum's Coastal Archaeology project, show just how sophisticated this infrastructure was. "Harbour ahead," calls the lookout, beacon lit. Through the gathering dusk you can see a fire burning on a rocky promontory, a navigation aid marking the entrance to a sheltered bay. This is your first glimpse of the extensive infrastructure that supported Viking voyaging. These weren't random stops at whatever coast appeared. They were carefully planned harbours with specific facilities for maritime crews. As the ship approaches the narrow entrance to the harbour, everyone braces for the final challenge of the day, navigating the rocky channel in fading light. Thorold stands at the steering oar, his experienced eyes reading the subtle patterns of waves and currents. With precise commands, he guides the ship through the treacherous entrance and into the calm waters beyond. The harbour opens before you, a perfect natural haven sheltered from the open sea by rocky arms. Along the shore, buildings are visible. Smoke rises from multiple hearths. The glow of fires reflects off the dark water. After days in the freezing darkness of the open Atlantic, it seems like paradise. "Harbour landing," Thorold calls. "All hands!" The ship glides toward a wooden jetty extending from the shore. Crew members prepare mooring lines. Others stand ready with fenders to protect the hull from impact. With a gentle bump, the ship comes alongside the jetty. Mooring lines are secured. After days of constant motion, the sudden stillness feels strange. "Land legs now," Bjorn says with a grin, seeing your unsteady steps as you prepare to disembark. Takes time to remember. As you step onto the solid wooden jetty, you realize you've completed the first leg of the Viking journey. Survived days at sea in freezing conditions without any source of fire. Not through superhuman endurance or mystical cold resistance, but through sophisticated systems of clothing, sleeping arrangements, and nutrition. Ahead of you, the harbour settlement promises transformation: warm fires, hot food, dry clothing. But this isn't just a pleasant interlude. It's an essential part of the Viking maritime system. Because what awaits on shore isn't just comfort. It's the other half of the infrastructure that made Viking voyaging possible. The land-based support system that complemented their maritime innovations. And that's a story for our next part. The settlement comes into focus as you walk up from the jetty. This is no primitive camp. What you're seeing is a sophisticated maritime infrastructure that archaeologists are only now beginning to fully understand. The harbour settlement consists of about 20 buildings arranged in a rough semicircle around the protected bay. Some are clearly longhouses, large rectangular structures with curved walls and turf roofs. Others are smaller outbuildings serving specialised functions. "Welcome to Falseyjarfjord," says a barrel-chested man who meets the crew at the end of the jetty. His name is Gunnar Thorsen, harbour master of this Greenlandic outpost. 3 days only, Thorold replies. Then we continue west. This brief exchange reveals the calculated nature of Viking voyaging. These stops weren't random or improvised. They were scheduled resupply points with predetermined durations. As you follow the crew toward the settlement, the most striking feature is the abundance of fire. After days in the freezing darkness of the open Atlantic, the warm glow of hearth seems almost magical. In the centre of the settlement stands a massive structure, at least 100 feet long and 30 feet wide. Smoke rises from 3 smoke holes in its turf roof. Light spills from its partially open door. Communal hall, Bjorn explains, seeing your interest, where everyone eats and sleeps. This matches archaeological findings from excavations like Torksey in England, conducted by the universities of Sheffield and York between 2009 and 2017. These revealed that Viking harbour settlements contained large central buildings specifically designed to accommodate entire ship crews simultaneously. Inside, the hall is a revelation of warmth and light. 3 large hearth fires burn in stone-lined pits running down the centre of the earthen floor. Smoke rises to the ceiling, finding its way out through the carefully designed smoke holes. The temperature difference between this space and the open deck of the ship is astonishing. While not as warm as a modern heated building, the hall maintains a steady temperature well above freezing, perhaps 50 Celsius 10 grader. After days in sub-freezing conditions, it feels like a furnace. Remove outer layers, Bjorn advises. Dry them by the fire, but not too close. This casual instruction reveals another aspect of Viking harbour stops: the systematic maintenance of maritime gear. Archaeological evidence from harbour sites shows dedicated areas for drying and repairing clothing, sails and equipment. You follow Bjorn's advice, carefully removing your sealskin outer jacket and waterproofed wool layers. The inner layers remain on your body, still damp with sweat from days of exertion. They'll dry better from your body heat than from exposure to open flame. The outer garments are hung on wooden racks positioned near, but not directly over, the hearth fires. This controlled drying prevented damage to the waterproofing treatments while removing dangerous moisture. "Food soon," Bjorn says, gesturing to the far end of the hall where women are busy at cooking stations. Real food. After days of cold provisions, the smell of hot cooking is almost overwhelming. Your stomach tightens with anticipation. But before eating, there's another crucial activity. Throughout the hall, crew members are engaged in systematic equipment maintenance, checking seams, repairing tiers, replacing worn lashings. Always check Always fix, Bjorn advises, showing you how to inspect your sleeping furs for dampness or damage. Small problems become deadly at sea. This rigorous maintenance regime is confirmed by archaeological evidence. Harbour sites like Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland and Sandens in Greenland show specialised workshop areas where maritime equipment was systematically repaired during shore stops. The food, when it arrives, is a stark contrast to the cold provisions of the voyage. Large wooden trenchers are filled with hot stew, chunks of seal meat with barley and wild onions, simmered for hours in iron cauldrons. The flavour is intense after days of bland, cold food. The hot liquid seems to warm you from the inside out, spreading through your body like liquid fire. Archaeological food remains from harbour sites confirm this pattern. While ships carried preserved foods designed for cold consumption, harbour settlements focused on hot, calorie-dense meals that could rapidly restore energy reserves. After eating, the next priority is personal hygiene, another aspect of Viking voyaging that archaeological evidence is revealing was far more sophisticated than popular stereotypes suggest. Adjacent to the main hall stands a smaller structure. Steam rises from a hole in its roof. This is the bathhouse, a feature found at multiple Viking harbour sites from Scandinavia to North America. Clean now, Bjorn advises. Everyone must. This wasn't a luxury but a survival necessity. Extended time at sea in cold, damp conditions created perfect conditions for skin infections and fungal growth. Regular cleaning at harbour stops prevented these potentially deadly conditions. Inside the bathhouse, flat stones are heated in a fire pit, then water is poured over them to create steam. The resulting sauna-like environment allows for thorough cleaning without the need for full immersion in cold water. Archaeological evidence from sites like Hedeby in Denmark shows Vikings used soap made from animal fat mixed with ash, a surprisingly effective cleanser. Combs, scraping tools and other personal care items are among the most common finds at harbour sites. Clean and fed, with equipment inspected and repairs underway, the crew finally rests properly. The communal hall contains raised sleeping platforms lined with fresh straw and furs, the first comfortable sleeping surface you've experienced in days. Despite the relative comfort, everyone still sleeps in their hud-fat sleeping bags. These aren't just maritime equipment but standard travel gear used throughout Viking culture. You settle into your sleeping bag, relishing the novel sensation of solid ground beneath you after days of constant motion. The warmth of the hearth fires, the sound of quiet conversation, the smell of wood smoke, all create an atmosphere of security and recovery. 3 days, Bjorn reminds you as he prepares his own sleeping spot, then back to the sea. This limited duration wasn't arbitrary. Archaeological evidence from harbour sites shows they were precisely scaled for specific fleet sizes and visit durations. Provisions, fuel and facilities were calculated to support maritime operations without depleting local resources. Morning brings renewed activity. With basic recovery accomplished, the focus shifts to the specialised maintenance that couldn't be performed at sea. The settlement contains dedicated workshops for different maritime crafts. One building houses woodworkers repairing oars, benches and structural elements. Another contains textile workers mending sails and clothing. A third holds metalworkers maintaining tools and fittings. Everyone contributes, Bjorn explains as he leads you to the sail repair workshop. Everyone has skills. Archaeological evidence confirms this pattern of specialised labour at harbour sites. Workshops show evidence of sophisticated tool use, and specialized production focused on maritime needs. The sail workshop is particularly impressive. Here, women work with bone needles and waxed thread to repair the massive woolen sail. Their stitching is precise, creating strong seams that will withstand the brutal conditions of the North Atlantic. "Sail is life," says an older woman supervising the work. "No sail, no ship, no ship, no return." This wasn't poetic exaggeration, but literal truth. A damaged sail meant death in the open ocean. The meticulous care given to these massive textiles reflects their critical importance. Archaeological textile remains from sites like Oseberg show Viking sails were technological marvels, densely woven wool treated with animal fat for water resistance. They represented hundreds of hours of skilled labour and were among the most valuable items a community possessed. In another workshop, men repair and rebuild oars. Each must be perfectly balanced and matched to its partner on the opposite side of the ship. Even small variations in weight or length would make rowing inefficient or dangerous in heavy seas. "Measure twice, cut once," the master carpenter says as he demonstrates the proper technique for shaping an oar blade. Sea doesn't forgive mistakes. Archaeological finds of woodworking tools at harbour sites show sophisticated understanding of wood properties and structural engineering. Vikings weren't just skilled sailors, they were master craftsmen whose technical knowledge enabled their maritime feats. The food preparation during harbour stays was equally sophisticated. A dedicated cooking house contains multiple hearth arrangements designed for different types of food. Iron cauldrons hang from tripods over open fires, containing slowly simmering stews. Flat stones heated in the fire serve as primitive griddles for baking bread. Clay ovens built into stone surrounds provide controlled heat for more precise cooking. Archaeological evidence from harbour sites shows these weren't random arrangements, but carefully designed systems for maximum efficiency. Viking cooks understood how different foods required different heating methods for optimal results. "Always prepare for the next voyage," explains the head cook as she oversees the preparation of travel provisions. Next harbour might be further than expected. This forward-thinking approach is confirmed by archaeological evidence. Harbour sites contain specialised storage facilities for maritime provisions, with evidence of systematic inventory management. One building in the settlement is particularly interesting. A large structure with stone foundations and a raised wooden floor. This is the provision house, where food for the next leg of the voyage is prepared and stored. Inside, women work at different stations preparing the cold consumption foods that will sustain the crew at sea. Some pound dried fish with wooden mallets to make it more palatable. Others mix barley porridge with butter and salt in large wooden tubs. Still others press ship's biscuit dough into wooden moulds for baking. 3 days bread, 5 days fish, 7 days porridge, the provision master recites as he oversees the inventory. Always extra, never short. Archaeological evidence from harbour sites confirms this calculated approach to provisions. Storage buildings show evidence of systematic organisation, with different foods kept in specialised containers appropriate to their preservation needs. As fascinating as these technical aspects are, perhaps the most important function of harbour stops was psychological. After days or weeks of constant vigilance in life-threatening conditions, crew members needed mental recovery as much as physical replenishment. In the evening, the communal hall transforms. The central space is cleared. Benches are arranged in a rough circle. An older man takes a central position, holding what looks like a small harp. Skald, Bjorn explains, story singer. What follows is a sophisticated form of entertainment and cultural reinforcement. The skald begins with traditional tales of gods and heroes, singing in a resonant voice while strumming simple accompaniment on his instrument. But then the performance shifts. He begins to recount recent voyages, celebrating the courage of specific crews, commemorating those lost to the sea, mapping new discoveries in poetic language that aids memorization. Archaeological evidence for this practice comes from both written sources like the sagas and physical finds of musical instruments and game pieces at harbour sites. These weren't just entertainment, but essential psychological support systems. Evidence from over 50 Viking winter camps excavated across Europe has revealed more than 300 gaming pieces, dice, board games, and carved entertainment items. According to researchers at the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo, crews invested significant time in these social activities during harbour stays. Play now, Bjorn advises, gesturing to a table where men are engaged in a board game resembling chess. No play at sea. This wasn't frivolous. Modern psychology confirms what Vikings apparently understood intuitively, that structured leisure activities are essential for mental recovery from prolonged stress. The game, called Nefertiafl or King's Table, was found at numerous Viking sites. Archaeological game pieces show it was played throughout the Viking world, with regional variations in rules and piece design. As night falls on the first day in harbour, you begin to appreciate the full sophistication of the Viking maritime system. These weren't brief, improvised stops, but carefully designed recovery periods that addressed every aspect of crew welfare: physical, technical, and psychological. The second day in harbour follows a similar pattern, but with increasing focus on preparation for the next voyage. Equipment repairs are completed, provisions are finalised and packed. The ship itself receives careful attention. At the jetty, shipwrights inspect every aspect of the vessel, checking for loose rivets, damaged strakes, worn lashings. Any issues are immediately addressed. No detail is too small when survival depends on structural integrity. Ship is sound, the master shipwright reports to Thorold after a thorough inspection. New caulking at the stern, otherwise good. Archaeological evidence confirms this systematic maintenance. Harbour sites show specialised areas for ship repair, with concentrations of discarded rivets, wood shavings, and caulking materials indicating regular shipboard maintenance. By the third day, the focus shifts entirely to departure preparations. The ship is gradually reloaded with fresh provisions, repaired equipment, and clean sleeping furs. Everything is stowed in precise locations, balancing the vessel and ensuring critical items remain accessible. West tomorrow, Thorold announces during the evening meal. Early departure. The announcement triggers final preparations. Sleeves are checked and adjusted. Sleeping partners are confirmed. Watch schedules are reviewed. On the morning of the fourth day, the harbour erupts into coordinated activity before dawn. Final provisions are carried aboard. Last equipment checks are completed. Personal gear is stowed in assigned locations. With practiced efficiency, the crew boards the ship. Everyone knows their place and purpose. There are no wasted movements, no confusion. As the first light of dawn breaks over the eastern horizon, the mooring lines are cast off. Oars extend from the ship's sides like insect legs. With synchronized power, they bite into the calm harbour water, propelling the vessel toward the narrow entrance channel. The transformation is remarkable. Within moments of casting off, the crew has shifted from land dwellers to maritime operators. The comfortable routines of the harbour are set aside. The disciplined systems of sea survival take their place. As the ship passes the harbour entrance and faces the open sea, you experience a profound insight. Vikings didn't conquer the North Atlantic by fighting against its deadly conditions. They succeeded by creating a sophisticated, integrated system, balancing sea and shore, motion and rest, exertion and recovery. Their use of harbour networks wasn't a limitation but a strength, a recognition of human biological realities and a systematic solution to those. Constraints. The ship clears the harbour entrance. The sail is raised to catch the following wind. Ahead lies the open Atlantic, freezing, merciless, and unexplored. But you face it now with deeper understanding. The journey ahead isn't about superhuman endurance of killing cold. It's about sophisticated systems working in concert, clothing, sleeping arrangements, nutrition, and critically, these harbour networks that made the whole enterprise possible. The harbour recedes behind you. The open sea stretches to the horizon, and with it comes the next test of Viking maritime ingenuity, the psychological challenge of existence in one of Earth's most hostile environments. The open ocean stretches in every direction, an endless expanse of grey-green waves beneath a leaden sky. 2 days have passed since leaving the harbour, and already the comforts of land seem like distant memories, half-remembered dreams from another life. You're back in the rhythm of shipboard existence. The cold is once again your constant companion. The layered clothing, the shared sleeping bag, the cold provisions, all have resumed their life-preserving functions. But something is different this time. You face the harsh conditions with greater confidence, deeper understanding. What once seemed like arbitrary suffering now reveals itself as a sophisticated system for survival. As you work alongside Bjorn, adjusting the sail to catch the shifting wind, you notice something unusual about the crew's behaviour. Despite the freezing conditions and constant discomfort, there's no despair, no collapse of morale. Everyone works with steady purpose, maintaining not just physical effort but mental resilience. "How do you not go mad out here?" you ask Bjorn during a brief rest. Weeks in the cold, nothing but ocean. He considers the question seriously, his ice-crusted beard catching the weak winter sunlight. "We have ways," he says finally. "Mind tricks, you might call them." This casual comment reveals one of the most overlooked aspects of Viking maritime success. Psychological strategies specifically developed for cold weather voyaging. Modern exploration psychology confirms what Vikings apparently discovered through experience, that mental state directly affects physical endurance in extreme environments. What researchers now call psychological thermogenesis is the measurable warming effect that positive mental states have on the human body. Studies of modern polar explorers show that maintaining positive mental engagement can increase peripheral body temperature by up to 2 degrees of Celsius, potentially the difference between frostbite and safety in extreme conditions. Vikings developed sophisticated techniques for maintaining this psychological resilience during long voyages. Archaeological evidence from ship finds and winter camps provides fascinating insights into these practices. One of the most important was structured social interaction. The watch system aboard Viking ships wasn't just about dividing labour. It was designed to ensure regular social contact and prevent the dangerous isolation that can occur even among people in close physical proximity. Watch changes soon, Bjorn notes, scanning the position of the sun through breaks in the clouds. Knud takes your place. Sigrid replaces me. This seemingly mundane rotation had profound psychological benefits. By regularly changing work partners throughout the voyage, each crew member maintained relationships with everyone aboard. No one became isolated. No social factions could form. Archaeological evidence for this practice comes from the Landnama Bok and other Icelandic records, which describe elaborate watch rotation systems on long voyages. But perhaps the most surprising psychological technique becomes evident as evening approaches. As the crew gathers in the protected midships area, settling onto the sea chests and storage boxes that double as seating, Thorold produces a small wooden box from his personal storage. Opening it reveals carved wooden pieces, the Viking board game Nefertafel that you saw being played in the harbour settlement. "Tonight we play," he announces, "Gunnar and Astrid against Leif and Sigrid, others tomorrow." Wait, what? They're playing board games on a freezing ship in the middle of the North Atlantic? It seems absurdly frivolous, a waste of precious energy and survival conditions. But archaeological evidence proves this wasn't unusual. Game pieces are among the most common finds on Viking ships and winter camps. The Sea Stallion reconstruction voyage in 2007 confirmed their practical value. Structured entertainment proved essential for crew morale during difficult passages. As the players set up the board on a sea chest, securing the pieces in small holes to prevent them sliding with the ship's motion, the rest of the crew gathers around to watch. The mood noticeably lightens. Conversation increases. Even laughter occasionally breaks the background sounds of wind and waves. "Games keep minds sharp," Bjorn explains, seeing your surprise. "Sharp minds keep bodies warm." This wasn't superstition, but practical psychology. Modern studies of winter isolation show that cognitive engagement significantly reduces perceived cold discomfort and improves physical cold tolerance. The game proceeds with surprising intensity. Strategic moves are debated. Clever tactics are appreciated with murmurs of approval. The outcome matters to everyone watching, creating a shared focus that transcends individual discomfort. When Astrid finally traps Leif's king piece, completing the victory, cheers erupt from their supporters. For a brief moment, the freezing conditions are forgotten in social celebration. This pattern of structured entertainment continues throughout the evening. After the game concludes, another psychological support system emerges: storytelling. An older crew member named Halvar takes the central position. With no introduction or preamble, he begins recounting a tale from the gods. The story of how Thor disguised himself as a bride to retrieve his stolen hammer from the giants. The narrative is clearly familiar to everyone. Occasional lines are recited in unison by the listeners. Favourite moments are anticipated with visible enjoyment. Archaeological evidence for this practice comes from both literary sources like the Eddas and physical finds of storytelling tokens and memory aids. These weren't just entertainment but sophisticated psychological tools for maintaining group cohesion during stressful voyages. "Stories connect us to home," Bjorn explains quietly as Halvar continues his tale. "To ancestors, to gods. We're never alone while we have stories." This connection to larger meaning beyond immediate circumstances has been identified by modern psychology as a critical factor in extreme environment resilience. People who maintain cultural connections and purpose survive hardship better than those focused only on immediate conditions. The storytelling continues for over an hour, one tale flowing into another. Throughout this time, regular ship operations continue. The watch changes, the sail is adjusted, ice is chipped from rigging. But these necessary tasks now occur within a psychologically supportive environment. As night fully descends and the temperature drops further, one final psychological technique emerges. From somewhere amidships, a deep male voice begins a chant. Simple, rhythmic, almost hypnotic in its repetitive pattern. Other voices join, some in unison, others in harmony. The sound swells across the open deck, somehow defying the wind that should scatter it. Sailing song, Bjorn explains, old magic. Archaeological evidence for Viking musical traditions comes from instrument finds and literary references. The psychological effect of group singing is well documented by modern research. It synchronizes breathing, releases endorphins, and creates powerful group bonding through shared experience. As you listen, you find yourself instinctively breathing with the rhythm of the song. Your body feels warmer, though the actual temperature continues to drop as night deepens. This integrated system of psychological supports, games, stories, music, wasn't accidental. It was a sophisticated approach to the mental challenges of extreme environment survival, developed through generations of maritime experience. When it's finally time to sleep, you settle into the hudfat with Bjorn, your body exhausted but your mind curiously at peace. Despite the freezing conditions and constant discomfort, you feel connected to something larger, the shared enterprise of the voyage, the ancient traditions it represents. Sleep now, Bjorn advises. Tomorrow brings work. Before sleep claims you, a final realization forms. Vikings didn't just engineer external systems for cold survival. The clothing, the sleeping arrangements, the nutrition. They engineered internal systems as well, psychological techniques specifically designed to maintain the mental resilience necessary for physical survival. Morning arrives with a new challenge. Overnight, the wind has shifted, bringing colder air from the northwest. Ice forms more rapidly on every surface. The sea itself takes on that strange, sluggish quality that precedes freezing. But the crew rises to meet this challenge with something that might almost be called cheerfulness. The psychological infrastructure established through games, stories, and songs continues its work even in daylight hours. As the morning routines unfold, sleeves adjusted, cold provisions distributed, watch assignments confirmed, another psychological technique becomes apparent: micro-competitions. Faster rigging clear today, Thorold announces, dividing the crew into two teams for the essential task of removing ice from the ship's lines and fittings. Winning side gets extra ration. This manufactured competition transforms a miserable, dangerous task into something approaching enjoyment. The teams work with focused intensity, calling encouragement and jeering good-naturedly at their opponents. Archaeological evidence for these practices comes from saga descriptions and the accounts of other cultures who encountered Vikings. The Arabic diplomat Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who met Vikings on the Volga River in the 10th century, noted their constant contests and challenges even during routine activities. Competition warms blood, Bjorn explains as he chips ice from a frozen line with methodical precision. Warm blood, warm body. Again, what might seem like folk wisdom has solid physiological basis. Modern sports psychology confirms that competitive engagement increases adrenaline production and blood circulation, both of which improve cold tolerance. The day progresses, filled with the now familiar routines of maritime survival, sailing, ice clearing, equipment maintenance, cold food consumption. But underlying all these physical activities is the continuous psychological support system. Micro-competitions emerge spontaneously throughout the day. Who can clear their section of rigging fastest? Whose knotwork is more precise? Who remembers the most verses of an old poem? These aren't distractions from survival work, but integral components of the Viking cold endurance system. They maintain engagement, focus attention outside immediate discomfort, and sustain the social connections essential for group resilience. By midday, another psychological technique emerges: future visualization. As the crew takes their cold meal, Thorold gathers everyone's attention to describe the destination awaiting them: a settlement on the western edge of Greenland, where resources are plentiful and welcome is certain. 3 more days, he promises, then hot food, warm fires, dry clothes. Archaeological evidence for this practice comes from voyage accounts in the sagas, which frequently describe leaders reminding crews of journey endpoints during difficult passages. Modern psychology confirms the effectiveness of this approach. Studies of extreme environment adaptation show that having a clear, positive endpoint significantly increases tolerance for current hardships. Focus on the harbour, Bjorn advises when he notices you staring too long at the endless waves, not the journey. This psychological technique of endpoint focus became especially important during the longest Viking voyages, particularly the initial crossings to Iceland, Greenland, and eventually North America. Archaeological evidence from settlements in these locations shows they were carefully designed to provide maximum psychological comfort for arriving crews. Large communal halls, substantial food storage, and dedicated bathing facilities created powerful incentives that could sustain motivation during difficult passages. As afternoon transitions toward evening, yet another psychological strategy emerges: controlled exposure therapy. Bare hand practice, Thorold announces. Everyone participates. What follows seems almost like madness. In rotation, each crew member removes their mittens and performs a complex knot-tying task with bare hands in the freezing air. They work with focused intensity, racing against the rapidly developing pain of cold exposure. 13 seconds, Bjorn announces proudly as he completes his turn. Best time yet. This practice, described in several saga accounts and confirmed by modern extreme environment training, systematically builds cold tolerance. By exposing extremities to controlled cold challenges, the body's vascular response is gradually trained to maintain circulation longer in adverse conditions. Modern winter survival training uses similar techniques, gradually building cold tolerance through regular controlled exposure. The psychological component is as important as the physical, developing confidence in one's ability to function despite discomfort. As the day progresses toward evening, the full sophistication of the Viking psychological system becomes increasingly apparent. Nothing is random. Everything serves the dual purpose of necessary ship operation and psychological resilience. Even the arrangement of the crew during sailing maneuvers is psychologically calculated. The most experienced sailors are positioned where they're visible to everyone, their calm competence providing reassurance during difficult conditions. Watch Gunnar, Bjorn advises, during particularly challenging sail adjustment. 30 winters at sea, never panics. Archaeological evidence for this deliberate psychological positioning comes from both saga accounts and the physical layout of recovered Viking ships. The positioning of thwarts, storage, and work areas created natural observation lines that reinforced leadership visibility. Evening brings a return to the now familiar psychological support, systems, games, stories, songs. But there's variation in the specifics, preventing the dangerous boredom that can undermine morale in isolated environments. Tonight's game is different. Taffel has been replaced by a dice game using carved bone pieces. The stories focus on historical voyages rather than mythological tales. The songs have shifted from chants to narrative ballads. This deliberate variation prevented psychological habituation, the diminishing effectiveness of repeated experiences. By changing specific elements while maintaining the overall structure, the system retained its effectiveness throughout long voyages. Never the same twice, Bjorn explains. Minds need newness like bodies need food. Modern psychological research confirms this principle. Studies of isolated groups in extreme environments show that maintaining novel experiences within familiar frameworks is critical for long-term mental health. As night deepens and the temperature drops further, one final psychological technique emerges, perhaps the most sophisticated of all. Thorold gathers the crew for a brief but powerful ritual. Each person speaks in turn, naming one thing they are grateful for despite the harsh conditions. Some mention family waiting at home. Others cite the skills of their shipmates. Still others express appreciation for the ship itself, faithfully carrying them across the deadly ocean. Archaeological evidence for gratitude practices comes from numerous Viking sources, particularly the private inscriptions found on personal items in burial contexts. These frequently express appreciation for relationships, skills, and natural phenomena. Modern positive psychology has confirmed what Vikings apparently discovered through experience, that gratitude practices significantly improve resilience in challenging circumstances. By focusing attention on positive aspects within difficult situations, the perceived burden of hardship is reduced. Your turn, Bjorn prompts when the circle reaches you. After a moment's thought, you express genuine gratitude for the knowledge being shared with you. The sophisticated systems that have transformed what should be a lethal environment into a survivable one. The simple ritual complete, the crew disperses to their various duties and rest positions. The psychological infrastructure has done its work for another day, maintaining the mental resilience necessary for physical survival. As you settle into the Hudfat for another night on the freezing ocean, you realize you've experienced something profound, a glimpse into how Vikings engineered not just their ships and clothing, but their minds, how they created psychological systems as sophisticated as their physical ones. The temperature drops further as night deepens. The wind increases, driving icy spray across the deck. By any objective measure, conditions are worsening. Yet within the carefully engineered system of Viking cold adaptation, both physical and psychological, survival remains not just possible but sustainable. Not through superhuman endurance or mystical cold resistance, but through sophisticated integrated systems developed over generations of maritime experience. Sleep comes with surprising ease, your mind calmed by the psychological infrastructure despite the physical discomfort of your surroundings. And as consciousness fades, one final insight forms. Perhaps the greatest achievement of Viking maritime culture wasn't just surviving the deadly conditions of the North Atlantic winter, but finding ways to maintain humanity, even joy, within those conditions. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. The Western Passage continues. The relentless cold remains. But now you understand the full sophistication of Viking adaptation, not just the clothing, sleeping arrangements and nutrition, but the psychological systems that made long-term endurance possible. The true secret of how they cross the most treacherous waters on Earth without fire, by engineering resilience into both body and mind. The Hudfat warms around you. The ship continues its westward journey. And even in the freezing darkness of the North Atlantic winter, the human spirit endures. Morning comes with unexpected clarity. The perpetual overcast of previous days has broken, revealing a pale blue winter sky streaked with high, thin clouds. The temperature remains well below freezing, but the absence of wind makes the cold somehow more bearable. Thorold studies the horizon with focused intensity, his experienced eyes reading subtle signs invisible to the untrained observer. After several minutes of silent contemplation, he makes a decision that surprises everyone. "Course change," he announces, "south by southwest." This deviation from the planned westward route causes a ripple of conversation among the crew. No one questions the command, but the reason isn't immediately obvious. "Weather sign," Bjorn explains quietly as you work together adjusting the sail to the new heading. "Storm building in the west. Captain sees it coming." This casual observation reveals another critical aspect of Viking maritime success: sophisticated weather prediction and strategic voyage planning. Vikings didn't blindly venture into the deadly North Atlantic at the mercy of whatever conditions they encountered. Archaeological and literary evidence shows they developed remarkably accurate systems for seasonal timing, weather prediction, and route planning. The sagas contain numerous references to specific sailing seasons, weather indicators, and navigation techniques. These weren't just folklore, but sophisticated environmental knowledge built through generations of observation and experience. Captain's grandfather taught him cloud reading, Bjorn continues. His grandfather before him. Knowledge passes down. This intergenerational transfer of environmental knowledge created a sophisticated predictive system long before modern meteorology. Vikings recognized specific cloud formations, watercolor changes, and animal behavior patterns that indicated approaching weather systems. Modern meteorological studies have confirmed the accuracy of many of these traditional indicators. The mackerel sky, altocumulus clouds, that Vikings associated with approaching storms does indeed typically precede weather changes by 12-24 hours. As the morning progresses, the wisdom of Thorold's course change becomes increasingly apparent. On the northwestern horizon, dark clouds begin to build, the leading edge of a winter storm system that would have directly intercepted the ship's original course. This wasn't luck or intuition, but calculated weather avoidance based on systematic observation. Archaeological evidence from navigation tools found in ship burials shows Vikings tracked and recorded weather patterns with surprising sophistication. The most dramatic example comes from the Wolin harbour excavation in Poland, where researchers found what appears to be a primitive weather diary. Wooden tablets with carved symbols tracking storm patterns across multiple seasons. By midday, the strategic nature of the course change is further confirmed. The ship is now positioned to use the approaching weather system advantageously, its southwestern edge potentially providing favourable winds for the journey west. "We sail with the storm, not against it," Thorold explains during the midday meal. "Let it push us where we need to go." This sophisticated understanding of weather dynamics was essential for Viking maritime success. Rather than fighting against overwhelming natural forces, they developed techniques to work with them, using storm patterns, ocean currents, and seasonal wind shifts to their advantage. Archaeological reconstruction of Viking routes based on ship capabilities and environmental data shows they weren't random or exploratory, but carefully optimized for prevailing conditions. Routes changed seasonally, sometimes monthly, to take advantage of predictable weather patterns. As afternoon progresses, the approaching storm system becomes more defined on the horizon. But rather than creating panic or despair, the crew responds with calculated preparations. Supplies are secured, rigging is checked, the sail is adjusted to capture the optimal wind angle. Storms are not enemies if you know them, Bjorn remarks, as he shows you how to secure your sleeping furs against the anticipated increase in ship motion. They can be allies. This philosophical approach to natural forces reveals a deeper aspect of Viking maritime culture. They didn't view nature as something to be conquered, but as a powerful system to be understood and worked with. Archaeological evidence from ship designs shows this philosophy in action. Rather than building increasingly rigid vessels to fight against wave action, Vikings created flexible hull structures that worked with the sea's motion, absorbing and redirecting energy rather than opposing it. By late afternoon, the storm's leading edge reaches the ship. The wind increases, now coming from the northwest, exactly as Thorold predicted. Rather than fighting against this change, the crew adjust the sail to harness it, significantly increasing their westward speed. "Good fortune," says Astrid as she distributes the evening meal. But Bjorn shakes his head slightly. "Not fortune. Planning," he corrects. "Captain knew this storm was coming 3 days ago. Watched the birds, the clouds, the watercolour." This systematic observation of natural indicators created a predictive capability that seemed almost supernatural to outside observers. Historical accounts from non-Norse sources often describe Vikings as having mysterious weather powers or sea magic. The reality was much more impressive. A sophisticated observational science developed through generations of maritime experience and careful knowledge transfer. As evening approaches, another aspect of Viking strategic voyage planning becomes apparent. Thorold consults with several senior crew members, calculating the ship's position based on the day's progress and environmental indicators. "Land tomorrow," he announces after these deliberations, "if the storm holds as expected." This wasn't just optimistic encouragement, but a calculated estimate based on sophisticated navigational knowledge. Archaeological and literary evidence shows Vikings maintained detailed mental maps of the North Atlantic, including relative distances, landmarks, and typical transit times under various conditions. The Landnama Bok, Book of Settlements, describes sailing times between various points with remarkable precision. 7 days sailing west from Bergen to Shetland, from there 5 days to Iceland, and 4 more to Greenland. These weren't approximations, but carefully measured transit times under specific seasonal conditions. As night falls and the storm intensifies, the strategic nature of Viking voyage planning becomes even clearer. The ship now rides the southwestern edge of the weather system, using its energy rather than fighting against it. The wind howls through the rigging, waves crash against the hull. The temperature drops further as night deepens. By any objective measure, conditions are extreme. Yet within the integrated systems of Viking maritime adaptation, physical, psychological, and now strategic, the situation remains not just survivable, but advantageous. The storm that would kill an unprepared crew is actively assisting this one, providing the propulsion needed to reach their destination. Sleep while you can, Bjorn advises as the crew prepares for night. Storm work comes later. This alternation of rest and intense activity was another aspect of Viking strategic planning. Archaeological evidence from ship designs and literary accounts shows they specifically organized voyages to maximize crew endurance through calculated work-rest cycles. Unlike later sailing traditions that maintained constant watches regardless of conditions, Vikings concentrated effort when absolutely necessary and prioritized rest at all other times. This strategic energy conservation was critical for maintaining crew function during the inevitable crisis periods of winter voyaging. As you settle into the hud fat for what might be your last night at sea on this passage, a profound realization forms. Vikings didn't just endure the brutal conditions of the North Atlantic, they strategically navigated them with sophisticated environmental knowledge. The storm rages throughout the night, but the ship rides it with surprising stability. The flexible hull design absorbs the wave energy. The sea-tested rigging holds despite the punishing wind. The crew, well rested from earlier conservative energy use, responds to occasional emergencies with focused efficiency. Dawn brings confirmation of Thorald's prediction. Through breaks in the storm clouds, land is visible on the western horizon, a dark line barely distinguishable from the grey sea and sky. Markland, Thorald announces, using the Norse name for what we now call Labrador. Harbour by nightfall. This landfall isn't luck or coincidence, but the result of sophisticated planning. Archaeological evidence from settlement patterns along the North American coast shows Vikings didn't explore randomly, but established precisely positioned harbour sites based on predictable sailing routes and transit times. As the morning progresses, another aspect of Viking strategic voyage planning becomes clear. The approaching land creates a natural wind shadow, reducing wave height and wind speed even while the storm continues in the open ocean. Captain knew this too, Bjorn explains as the ship enters noticeably calmer waters. Land blocks storm, easier landing. This strategic use of geographical features was another element of Viking maritime success. Archaeological reconstruction of their routes shows they consistently used islands, headlands, and coastal configurations to minimize exposure to the worst ocean conditions. By midday, the coast resolves into clearer detail, a rocky shoreline backed by dense conifer forest. Thorald studies it with practiced attention, identifying specific landmarks that confirm their precise location. Keel point ahead, he announces, harbour entrance beyond. This navigational precision reveals the sophistication of Viking geographical knowledge. Without charts, compasses, or formal instrumentation, they maintained detailed mental maps of coastlines thousands of miles from their homelands. Archaeological evidence for this comes from the remarkable accuracy of saga descriptions when compared to actual geographical features. Locations described in texts written centuries ago can still be identified with precision in places like Lonceau Meadows in Newfoundland. As the ship approaches the coast, you notice a pattern that wasn't obvious from farther out. The harbour entrance Thorald identified is perfectly positioned to provide shelter from the prevailing winter storms while remaining accessible to ships arriving from the east. Not an accident, Bjorn says, noticing your interest. First explorers spent years finding perfect harbours. We follow their wisdom. This strategic harbour selection was another crucial element of Viking voyage planning. Archaeological evidence from harbour sites across the North Atlantic shows they weren't opportunistic landfalls, but carefully selected locations with specific characteristics: natural protection from prevailing storm directions, accessible approach vectors for ships arriving from established routes, sufficient depth for loaded vessels, freshwater access, defensible position, proximity to essential resources. By mid-afternoon, the ship passes through the harbour entrance, a natural channel between rocky headlands that break the worst of the ocean swell. Inside lies a perfect natural haven, sheltered from the open sea on three sides, and it's not empty. Several buildings stand along the shore. Smoke rises from stone hearths. A wooden jetty extends into the deep water of the harbour. This isn't wilderness, it's infrastructure, another link in the sophisticated network that supported Viking transatlantic voyaging. Harbourmaster sees us, Thorold notes, as a figure appears on the jetty, waving in recognition. This wasn't a chance encounter, but an expected arrival within a coordinated maritime system. Archaeological evidence from harbour sites shows they maintained regular communication through dedicated messenger ships that travelled established routes with news and coordination information. As the ship approaches the jetty, you notice another strategic element of Viking voyage planning. The harbour is positioned to capture maximum sunlight during short winter days, with the settlement buildings arranged to block the prevailing wind while remaining open to the southern sun angle. Warm harbour, Bjorn says with satisfaction, even in winter. This strategic positioning for microclimatic advantage was another sophisticated aspect of Viking maritime infrastructure. Archaeological excavations show harbour settlements were specifically designed to create the most favourable local conditions possible, often differing significantly from regional climate patterns. The ship comes alongside the jetty with practiced precision. Mooring lines are secured. After days in the freezing isolation of the open Atlantic, you've reached another safe haven in the Viking maritime network. But this isn't just a fortunate outcome of brave exploration. It's the result of sophisticated strategic planning developed over generations: seasonal timing, weather prediction, route optimization, geographical knowledge, and infrastructure development. As you step onto the solid wooden jetty, legs unsteady after days at sea, a profound realization forms. Vikings didn't conquer the North Atlantic through reckless courage or superhuman endurance. They succeeded through sophisticated systems thinking that integrated physical, psychological, and strategic elements into a comprehensive approach to maritime survival. The harbour settlement welcomes the arriving crew with practiced efficiency. Hot food is already being prepared in the communal hall. Fresh clothing is available. Bathing facilities are being heated. This wasn't random hospitality, but calculated support for maritime operations. Archaeological evidence from harbour sites shows they maintained reserve supplies specifically for arriving ships, with inventory systems scaled to expected traffic volume. As you enter the communal hall, the blissful warmth of the central hearth fires envelops you. After days in the freezing conditions of the open ocean, it feels like paradise. But now you understand that this moment isn't just good fortune. It's the culmination of an integrated system designed to make the impossible possible, to enable human survival and function in one of Earth's most hostile environments. Vikings didn't heat their ships. They didn't need to, because they engineered something far more powerful: a comprehensive system of clothing, sleeping arrangements, nutrition, psychological support, and strategic planning that transformed the deadly North Atlantic into a navigable highway. As you settle by the hearth fire, savouring its warmth, a final insight forms. The most remarkable achievement of Viking maritime culture wasn't just reaching new lands or establishing trade routes. It was their ability to systematically solve complex survival challenges through integrated multi-generational problem solving. They didn't just endure the freezing seas, they mastered them through human ingenuity, cooperation, and systematic knowledge development. The fire crackles in the hearth, the wind howls outside, and within this sheltered haven you understand how Vikings accomplished the seemingly impossible, crossing the most treacherous waters on Earth without fire, not through superhuman abilities or mystical powers, but through the uniquely human capacity for innovative problem-solving and collective knowledge-building. The greatest adventure wasn't the voyage itself, but the centuries of innovation that made it possible. 3 days pass in the comfort of the harbour settlement. 3 days of warmth, hot food, proper rest and equipment maintenance. 3 days of recovery and preparation. On the morning of the 4th day, Thorold gathers the crew in the communal hall. Maps drawn on scraped calf skin are spread across a large wooden table. These aren't modern charts with precise coordinates, but sophisticated navigational tools nonetheless, showing coastlines, currents, prevailing winds, and harbour locations. "Here we are," he says, indicating the Markland harbour. "Here we go." His finger traces a route southward along the coast, then east toward Greenland. This casual planning session reveals the true scale of Viking maritime achievement. The voyage being discussed so matter-of-factly would cross nearly 1,000 miles of the world's most dangerous waters. To put this in perspective, when Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492, nearly 500 years after the Vikings, it was considered miraculous. He was celebrated as a hero, his voyage deemed almost supernatural in its achievement. Yet here, in this simple harbour settlement, a Viking crew calmly plans a similar crossing as routine business. What Columbus did with royal funding, cutting-edge ships, and the best navigation technology of Renaissance Europe, Vikings accomplished with technology that most historians once dismissed as primitive. "Good sailing for 4 days, Thorold continues, studying the skies visible through the hall smoke hole, then harbour at Bear Island before crossing to Greenland. This strategic planning reveals the integrated nature of Viking maritime operations. Archaeological evidence shows they didn't make single epic voyages, but constructed carefully planned segments, each calculated for optimal conditions and sustainable human endurance. The preparation for departure provides another demonstration of Viking maritime sophistication. Nothing is left to chance. Food provisions are carefully inventoried. Water barrels are filled with precisely calculated amounts. Clothing and equipment are systematically inspected. "No mistakes," Bjorn emphasizes, as he shows you how to check your wool garments for weak spots or dampness. One small error becomes deadly at sea. This meticulous attention to detail characterized Viking maritime operations. Archaeological evidence from ship burials and harbour sites shows they maintained rigorous standards for equipment quality and preparation. By midday, all is ready. The ship has been loaded with fresh provisions. Equipment has been repaired and improved. The crew is rested, fed, and prepared for the voyage ahead. As you board the ship alongside the other crew members, you realize you're experiencing something profound, not just a historical recreation, but a glimpse into the systematic genius that enabled one of humanity's greatest achievements, the Norse crossing of the North Atlantic 5 centuries before the rest of Europe believed it possible. The ship casts off, oars propelling it smoothly through the protected harbour waters. As it passes the entrance and meets the open sea, sails are raised to catch the following wind. The voyage continues, but you're different now. The freezing conditions remain challenging, but your perception has transformed. What once seemed like mindless suffering now reveals itself as a sophisticated integrated system. Clothing, sleeping arrangements, nutrition, psychological support, and strategic planning, all working in concert to make the impossible possible. Understand now? Bjorn asks as you work together, adjusting the sail to catch the optimal wind angle. You do understand, and the realization is humbling. Vikings didn't conquer the North Atlantic through superhuman cold tolerance or mindless courage. They achieved it through systematic problem-solving and multi-generational knowledge development. Not just one thing, Bjorn continues, noting your comprehension. All things working together. This holistic systems approach was the true genius of Viking maritime culture. Archaeological evidence across hundreds of sites shows they didn't just innovate in isolated areas, but created integrated solutions that addressed every aspect of cold weather survival. As the day progresses and the ship moves steadily southward along the Markland coast, you observe the crew with new appreciation. Every action, every piece of equipment, every social interaction serves multiple purposes within the integrated survival system. The layered wool clothing isn't just random warmth, but a sophisticated technology optimized through generations of trial and error. The communal sleeping arrangements aren't just shared body heat, but calculated energy conservation. The cold food systems aren't just preserved calories, but precision-engineered nutrition for specific maritime conditions. Even the ship itself represents integrated systems thinking. Its design isn't just transportation, but a carefully optimized balance of speed, capacity, strength, and flexibility. Each characteristic deliberately selected to support transoceanic voyaging in the world's most challenging waters. Romans had bigger ships, Bjorn notes during a quiet moment at the steering oar. Byzantine had fancier ships, but none crossed these waters, only us. This wasn't Viking boasting, but historical fact. Archaeological evidence shows that while Mediterranean civilizations developed sophisticated ships with cabins, galleys, and heating systems, none successfully operated in the North Atlantic until centuries after the Vikings established regular routes. Why did Vikings succeed where others failed? The answer lies in their fundamentally different approach to maritime challenges. Mediterranean shipbuilders focused on creating vessels that could carry maximum cargo in relatively benign conditions. They prioritized capacity over seaworthiness, comfort over survivability. Vikings, facing the deadly reality of the North Atlantic, made different choices. They prioritized flexible hulls that could ride massive waves. They eliminated fire hazards even at the cost of comfort. They developed maritime clothing, sleeping, and food systems that functioned without heat. Most importantly, they created a comprehensive approach that addressed every aspect of cold weather survival: physical, psychological, and strategic. Nothing was left to chance or courage. Everything was systematically engineered for success in the most demanding conditions imaginable. As evening approaches on this first day of the new voyage, the familiar shipboard rituals resume. Sleeves are adjusted for the cooling temperature. The sail tent is arranged to protect the sleeping area. The HUD-FAT sleeping bags are prepared for the night ahead. But now you understand these aren't just arbitrary traditions, but sophisticated survival technologies, each developed through generations of maritime experience, each serving multiple functions within the integrated system. As you settle into the HUD-FAT beside Bjorn, the physical experience remains challenging. The cold is still biting, the ship's motion is still violent, the conditions are still objectively harsh. But your perception has transformed. What once seemed like mindless suffering now reveals itself as one of history's greatest achievements, the systematic conquest of Earth's most hostile environment through human ingenuity and cooperation. Sleep, Bjorn advises. Tomorrow we sail south, warmer waters. The voyage continues for 7 more days, following the route Thorold mapped in the harbour settlement, stopping at designated waypoints, always operating within the integrated Viking maritime system. On the morning of the 8th day, the ship approaches a larger settlement on the southwestern coast of Greenland. This isn't just another harbour, but a major Norse colony, one of the endpoints in their remarkable transatlantic network. Stone buildings line the protected harbour. Dozens of ships are drawn up on the beach or moored at wooden jetties. Smoke rises from numerous hearth fires. Even from a distance, the bustle of a thriving maritime community is evident. Herjolfsness, Thorold announces as the ship enters the harbour, gateway to the eastern routes. This casual description belies the historical significance of what you're witnessing. Archaeological excavations at Herjolfsnes have revealed it was a sophisticated maritime hub that connected the Norse settlements in North America with Iceland, Greenland, and ultimately Scandinavia. From here, ships would carry North American resources, timber, furs, possibly even precious metals, back to European markets. Others would bring European goods, iron tools, luxury items, specialized equipment, to the Western settlements. This wasn't just exploration or isolated settlement, but a functioning trans-oceanic trade network, operating 5 centuries before Columbus. The scale and sophistication of this achievement becomes more astonishing the more you understand about the challenges involved. As the ship docks at one of the jetties, the full scope of Viking maritime achievement comes into focus. This wasn't just a single voyage or isolated expedition. It was a sustained, multi-generational enterprise that systematically conquered the most challenging maritime environment on Earth. Archaeological evidence from sites across the North Atlantic confirms the extent of this achievement. Viking artifacts have been found from Newfoundland to Ireland, from Labrador to France. There, ships reached Baghdad through the Russian river systems and Constantinople via the Mediterranean. They established colonies in places considered unreachable by other European powers until centuries later. All of this was accomplished without cabin heating, without navigation instruments, without weather forecasting technology, replaced instead by sophisticated systems of clothing, sleeping, nutrition, psychological support, and strategic planning. As you step onto the solid wooden jetty of Herjolfsnes, legs adjusting to land after days at sea, a profound realization forms. The Vikings didn't just survive the North Atlantic. They didn't just explore it, they mastered it through systematic problem-solving and integrated systems thinking. Their ships never carried fire, but they carried something far more powerful: human ingenuity, cooperation, and the accumulated knowledge of generations. With these tools, they accomplished what other civilizations considered impossible. They reached North America 500 years before Columbus. They established trade routes from Greenland to Constantinople. They shaped medieval Europe through maritime dominance. And they achieved it all in open boats, deliberately choosing to sail without fire. When winter wind cuts through your modern jacket, when you instinctively reach for your car's heater, remember that Viking sailors made the conscious decision to reject such comfort. They chose strategic capability over warmth, operational safety over individual ease, collective survival over personal comfort. Vikings didn't just endure the cold. They systematically transformed their entire approach to survive and thrive within it. They restructured their social systems around it. They reimagined what was possible within its constraints. In the end, Vikings didn't need to heat their ships because they had learned something far more powerful: how to heat themselves through cooperation, planning, and sheer strategic brilliance. And in that transformation, from comfort-dependent land dwellers to cold-adapted maritime warriors, they became unstoppable. The legacy of this achievement extends far beyond Viking history. The systematic problem-solving approach they developed, addressing challenges through integrated physical, psychological, and strategic solutions, represents a template for human adaptation that remains relevant today. From polar exploration to space travel, from disaster response to climate adaptation, the fundamental principle remains the same. The most effective solutions don't fight against environmental constraints, but work within them, transforming limitations into opportunities through integrated systems thinking. Vikings didn't conquer the North Atlantic by overpowering its deadly conditions, but by systematically adapting to them, creating comprehensive solutions that addressed every aspect of the challenge. Their ships carried no fire, but they carried something infinitely more valuable: the uniquely human capacity for innovative problem-solving and collective knowledge development. And that perhaps is the greatest lesson from this remarkable chapter of human history, that our most powerful technology isn't fire or steel, or even digital computation, but our ability to work together across generations to solve seemingly impossible challenges. Vikings reached North America without GPS, without weather forecasting, without thermal clothing technology, replaced instead by systematic observation, multi-generational knowledge transfer, and integrated problem-solving. They sailed the world's most dangerous waters in open boats with no heating, achieving what other civilizations considered impossible, not through superhuman abilities, but through distinctly human ingenuity. And as you lie in your comfortable bed, warm and secure while winter winds howl outside your window, perhaps that's worth remembering, that human beings are capable of extraordinary achievements, not because we're individually superhuman, but because we can work together to solve problems systematically across generations. The Vikings conquered the North Atlantic 5 centuries before Columbus, not because they were cold-resistant superhumans, but because they were systematic problem solvers who understood something profound: that the greatest human technology isn't fire or steel or digital systems, but our collective capacity for adaptation. Sleep well, warm and comfortable in your modern bed. But perhaps, as you drift toward dreams, spare a thought for those Viking crews on the freezing North Atlantic, not suffering mindlessly, but systematically engineering solutions that would change the course of human history. And perhaps find in their story not just historical interest but inspiration, a reminder that human beings can solve seemingly impossible problems through cooperation, innovation, and the stubborn refusal to accept limitations as final. Vikings never heated their ships, but they heated something far